In the run-up to the 2024 elections, President-elect Donald Trump had spoken of stopping wars. He said even before he enters the White House again, the Russia-Ukraine war would be over. But does Donald Trump have a roadmap for it? And will there be escalation or de-escalation in West Asia vis-a-vis Iran and the proxies of Iran and the tensions that we speak of in the South and East China Sea? Donald Trump has spoken of making America great again. But can America be great if it remains a safe haven for terrorists and separatists like Gurpatwant Singh Pannu and the other Khalistanis, either in America or in Canada? What about reigning in Canada that openly backs terrorists of Khalistan? There are many questions, and on this special broadcast, we explore answers. I'm Gaurav Sawant. All eyes were focused on the US presidential elections, and Donald Trump created history. He's won 277 electoral college votes in the race to the White House, defeating Kamala Harris at 224. And projections indicate that Donald Trump could win as many as 312 electoral college seats, winning 4 and leading in the other 3 swing states. Now, in his victory speech, he spoke of the task at hand, which includes ending wars across the world. But can he do it? From the Russia-Ukraine war to the Israel-Iran conflict, there are multiple questions. How will he deal with China in his second tenure? What will his relationship be with Prime Minister Narendra Modi and India in his second term as President of the United States and Prime Minister Narendra Modi's third term leading India? What about Khalistan terrorists and separatists, not just on US soil, but also in their neighborhood, in Canada? And as we seek answers and discuss the road ahead, listen in to the US President-elect, Donald Trump.
Strong and powerful military, and ideally we don't have to use it. You know, we had no wars, 4 years we had no wars, except we defeated ISIS. We defeated ISIS in record time, but we had no wars. They said, he will start a war. I'm not going to start a war. I'm going to stop wars. But this is also a massive victory for democracy and for freedom. Together we're going to unlock America's glorious destiny, and we're going to achieve the most incredible future for our people.
So, with Donald Trump set to enter White House once again on the 20th of January 2025 when the inauguration takes place, is that bad news for those who are seeking endless supply of weapons to Ukraine? Is Europe also now on notice, given Donald Trump's views on the funding of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization and the defense of Europe? What next? Joining me on this India First special is Lieutenant General Syed Atta Hasnain on the military perspective on the road ahead. Someone who keeps a hawk eye on developments not just in West Asia, but also in Russia and Ukraine. Ambassador Veena Sikri's former top Indian diplomat, has served as a High Commissioner to Bangladesh. Sushant Sareen is a senior fellow at the Observer Research Foundation. And General Hasnain, I want a military perspective from you. What would President Volodymyr Zelensky in Ukraine be thinking tonight? Will the Trump administration, in your view, continue to supply weapons to Ukraine, or has Donald Trump's election perhaps opened a window for a ceasefire and to explore peace?
Thank you very much for inviting me for this very important discussion today. One is tempted immediately to jump in and say yes to your question, that there is likely to be a change immediately. Going by recent history, the meeting of President-elect Donald Trump with the Ukrainian president only 2 months ago, it seems as if Trump has got solutions to everything. He says Putin is a friend and that this war would never have begun if he had been the president at that particular time in February of 2022. So going by all this, it seems that he is quite confident that he can push Ukraine into some kind of a ceasefire deal. It would possibly, I mean, from any perspective, one can take a guesswork on that and say the situation as it is currently today, the Donbass area where things stop, Ukraine does not want to negotiate anything on Donbass at all, but a ceasefire without Donbass remaining in Russian hands doesn't seem likely at all. So this is
Okay.
one direction in which definitely President Trump or President-elect Trump could possibly push. The second thing is about NATO. Now, we have seen from the past how the funding of NATO itself was something which
Yes.
Trump was extremely critical about. With that in mind, the fact that President Biden had opened up $62 billion worth of aid almost to Ukraine and had promised recently from the G7 almost $15 billion out of the $20 billion aid, it seems that President-elect Trump may pull back from that too. But
And if
all
there is no
this is
money, if
tempted to
if there
say,
is a check on funds, General, and I want to bring Ambassador Veena Sikri into this conversation, check on funds, check on weapons. What does that mean, Ambassador Sikri? And would Europe also be very worried tonight? You heard what the French spokesperson also said. Donald Trump's views on funding of NATO are very well known. Will this compound Ukraine's problems now?
Well, it will compound the problems of President Zelensky, that's for sure. I think we all know that the conflict in Ukraine would have ended almost as soon as it had begun, because there were negotiations between President Putin's team and President Zelensky's team. They were very close to an agreement. It was then Prime Minister Boris Johnson who prevented it at the behest of the Americans. So actually, the fact that this war has gone on for so long and has become so intense and eventually has worked to the advantage of Russia is all the doing of the misplaced priorities of the Biden administration. I think President Trump's biggest commitment is to end the wars. It was almost the first thing he said in his victory speech, that he's going to end the wars. He is committed to doing it. He probably got a lot of extra votes from the young people because of this. From the women because of this. He has to do it. Now, how much pressure he can put on President Zelensky is the matter. And I think he is uniquely positioned, President Trump is uniquely positioned to put this pressure on President Zelensky. For example, he could call for an immediate ceasefire and start of dialogue and diplomacy without any question of withdrawal from territories, etc. Just have a ceasefire and start discussions. This could be one of the positions that he could take. So I think that he is uniquely positioned. He is mandated to do it. He is obliged
He's
to do it.
mandated to do it. Prime Minister Narendra Modi, he's been to Russia twice in July and then recently again in Kazan on the sidelines of BRICS, had a meeting with President Putin. He's been to Ukraine, has had a meeting with President Zelensky, has met him on the sidelines of G7. So Sushant Sareen, is there a framework that's already in place, and would President-elect Trump be more disposed towards following that peace plan, given one, his personal equation with Prime Minister Narendra Modi, the pressure he can mount on President Zelensky, the equation with President Putin in Russia? So how do you see this pan out?
So, Gaurav, I don't know whether there is some kind of a framework that, we have presented to either of the two protagonists, Russia and Ukraine. I'm not aware of it. I don't think anybody is. But I think what we have been saying is something which other countries have also been saying, although we are in a unique position that we are able to engage with both the Russians as well as with the Ukrainians. Not many countries or leaders can boast of being able to do that. So I don't know how this is going to play out, but I would tend to agree with both my colleagues on the show that, if Trump was to, again, it's going to be 3 months before he actually takes office. And a lot can happen in those 3 months. Will that period be used by both the protagonists to call for a ceasefire, or will it happen after the Trump administration is in office? One. Secondly, even if the Trump administration is in office, I agree with Ambassador Sikri that you can't end this thing by saying, okay, both sides go back to where you were before the war started. So you will have to call for a ceasefire, which means that this will remain an outstanding issue and only diplomacy and some kind of negotiations will have to take place. But I think on the NATO front, look, at one level, many of the NATO countries have already started living up to their commitments, which is what Trump wanted them to do. That I think 2% of their GDP has to be contributed for, defense purposes or for NATO. Many of them have already started doing it. Some are still not doing it. So I think one will be that pressure. The second is that they all need to start putting in at least relatively speaking, whatever their share is going to be in whatever other adventurism that NATO engages in, for example, in Ukraine. And I think that is where the Europeans will balk, because their economies are also in a lot of trouble. So there are going to be some headwinds in this transatlantic relationship. But I think on the positive side, from an Indian point of view, if tensions between the US and Russia come down, which has to happen if you are going to be pushing for some kind of a détente with Russia, I think that's good for us, because a lot of the bad mouthing which the Western liberal media has been doing of India and politicians have been doing of India, that rhetoric ends. It creates a lot of space for us. We can breathe a lot easier. We don't have to do the kind of tightrope walking we have been doing. So I think it does create a lot of space for us. Because
and then perhaps focus on the real threat, that is China, and a real threat to all democracies, not just India. The immediate threat may be to India, but China and its expansionism poses a major threat. So since you spoke of India, let me now take that strand a little forward. Prime Minister Narendra Modi and the US President-elect Donald Trump, they're close personal friends. I've reported on Howdy Modi at Houston, Texas. I've reported on Namaste Trump at Gujarat, and multiple other engagements that the two leaders have had firsthand. So let's discuss the relationship at home in the years to come. But first, let's listen in to Donald Trump on Narendra Modi and Narendra Modi on Donald Trump. Listen in.
We in India have connected well with President Trump. The words of candidate Trump, अब की बार ट्रंप सरकार, rang loud and clear, and his celebration of Diwali in the White House lit up millions of faces with joy and appreciation. When I met him for the first time, he said to me, India has a true friend in White House.
Modi. India. Yeah. Mm-hmm. He's a friend of mine. He's great. He's the nicest.
India. This is for you.
Oh, good. Well, I'll tell you. Do you like him or not?
Yeah.
Do you like him?
I have family on both sides, though. I have family that loves everything and family
I'll just tell
not.
you, though. You need him. I know. Well, they had, before him, they were replacing him every year. It was very unstable. Mm-hmm. He came along.
He's in a lot.
He's great. He's a friend of mine. But on the outside, he looks like he's your father. He's the nicest, total killer.
Now, when they speak of each other, it's very warmly. It's as if they're close friends. Ambassador Sikri, how do you see this pan out in Trump's second tenure and Prime Minister Modi's third tenure? Will there be friction on the tariff front, on the trade front, on the H-1B visa issue? Or that's something that the two sides can handle well and bring their commonalities together?
Oh, yes. I think that I see a very good relationship working out between India and the USA during the second presidency of President Trump and the third prime ministership of Prime Minister Modi. I think that there will, of course, be trade and migration are two big issues that President Trump has flagged constantly during his campaigning, and he even mentioned India, that India is the king of tariffs, etc. So obviously there will be some hard negotiations on that, but it is not to say that nothing can be worked out. It can certainly be worked out. It's happened in the past, even when George Bush was president, and good things were worked out. I think for one thing that with between Prime Minister Modi and President Trump, we can have a frank discussion on some of the issues that have bedeviled the relationship in the last few months. The Khalistani threats, the separatists, yes. Panun, Canada, all these issues need to be discussed and worked out. We've seen already how President Trump has spoken about Bangladesh. We have seen what he said about the chaos in Bangladesh, about the barbaric attack on the Hindus. Obviously, he's sensitive to South Asia. He knows what is going on in South Asia. He knows India, the importance of India's neighborhood first foreign policy. So I think with each of us keeping the other's primary interests in mind and negotiating on the basis of mutual trust and mutual benefit, we will be able to have a very positive relationship. I do see that all the delays in sending the GE engines, etc., all these things will be worked out, and we will have a very good economic partnership.
You know, since you mentioned the Khalistan issue and the Biden administration pushing India on Pannu, the Trudeau administration pushing India on Niger, Sushant Sareen, will India be able to emphatically say that if you're such a close strategic partner of ours, the Indian consulate cannot be set on fire in San Francisco? That's not freedom of expression. Khalistanis cannot threaten to bring down Indian aircraft. That's not freedom of expression. And you cannot have India's enemies as your citizens or guests. That's not freedom of expression. What about Trump? What about Trudeau?
So Gaurav, look, I think we need to be very clear about one thing, that Trump is an anti-establishment guy. He's always spoken out against the deep state. Now, a lot of the stuff which has been happening with the Khalistanis, for example, these terrorists and thugs, and we have very serious suspicions and reasons to believe that this is part of a campaign being used to pressure India. So I think we can have a conversation with Trump and his closest advisors and his members of his cabinet on this particular issue. I can understand that, a few hotheads are shouting some slogans. Nobody gives a damn about those guys, right? But when you start making death threats, when you start threatening to bring down aircraft, when you do a whole lot of other stuff which these guys are doing, I think that you need to put a stop to it. Secondly, on the Canada front, I think the US and Canada will have their own problems on trade issues, tariff issues, a range of other issues, including ideological and political, because, given a kind of a woke character like Trudeau and his party, I'm not very sure if the relationship will work out very well. But I don't think we have many expectations or should have many expectations from the US. The Five Eyes alliance is not going anywhere. So there will be that continuing compact between them. But there could be certain things that we could seek from the US to impress upon the Canadians, to forget about the demonstrations and whatever, infiltration these thugs have made in the Canadian political system. As long as it does not affect our security, it does not affect the security of the Indian diaspora, of the Hindu and the Sikh community in Canada, I think we can live with some noise being made by these drug traffickers, toilet cleaners and truckers in Canada. It's not a big...
And frankly, it's in Canada's interest to rein in these elements, because a spark neglected will burn down their house. General Hasnain, your appreciation on the China front. How do you see Donald Trump deal with China, given his track record in his first term, in his second term?
See, Gaurav, there's no doubt, first of all, our own relationship with China, preceding the success of President Trump now, is something very positive also. So going by that, definitely, and the last time that the kind of support that President Trump had given to India, it is obvious that that kind of a backing will continue. But obviously, he's a man who wants to avoid confrontation. He wants to avoid conflicts at any cost. What he would always like to promote is trade, and in different ways. So I can foresee that India can expect a fair amount of support from the Trump administration as far as its relationship with China is concerned.
Okay, India can expect support on China in terms of perhaps intelligence inputs, in terms of the cooperation that was on in his first tenure when it came to Doklam, alerting India, ensuring India is able to get systems in place, reorganizing a lot of stuff, or does that cooperation extend deeper in the Indo-Pacific, in your view, Ambassador Sikri?
Well, I think, first of all, that President Trump is going to call out China more and more. He had started doing this in his first term, and Biden rolled back a little bit, did a little bit also. But right now, President Trump, especially with his focus on trade and his focus on what China has been doing to infiltrate the American market, whether it is stealing technology or sending their goods there at cheaper prices, and and also trying to buy up a lot of land and factories and so on in America, he's not going to allow any of that. Now, as far as India, China, and America is concerned, I think statements like respect for full sovereignty of India, the BRI going through Pakistan-occupied Jammu and Kashmir, these kind of issues would be very important for India. And if we can talk about those issues, that is very important. I think that India's own efforts at modernization, at beefing up the infrastructure at the LAC, and actually showing that we can stand up to the Chinese and stare them down, and they blinked first on the Demchok issue. And I think this is an important indication to America that we have the capacity. So Americans strengthening India's own capacity to face up to China and other security threats. This is important. Quad is very important. Next year, President Trump should be in India for the Quad summit, and that will be a very important occasion for both of us, both our countries, to review the relationship. And I think that this is something that we have to look forward to. Certainly on security, on trade, on the Quad, on maritime security, a good understanding with America can certainly be developed with President Trump there and Prime Minister Modi in India.
Because one aspect that I've heard Prime Minister Narendra Modi extensively talk about when it comes to India-US relationship is these are the two oldest, largest, strongest democracies in the world, very close strategic partners. And when they come together, they should work not only for the benefit of each other, but for the benefit of the entire humankind. This has been said both in Houston, Texas. It's been said during Namaste Trump in Gujarat and, of course, elsewhere. But as I leave our viewers, I want to thank our guests for joining me on this special broadcast. I want to leave our viewers with the celebrations in the United States of America. It was seen as a neck-and-neck fight, but the manner in which Donald Trump was able to zoom ahead, pull ahead, I want to leave you with these images of the celebrations, the dance, and Donald Trump, President-elect of the United States of America, saying thank you to all his voters and supporters.